Awesome, folks. Thanks for joining us here. Speaker number 2, we got Coach Jess from the University of Waterloo with us today. Super pumped to have her on talking about skill development in and out of COVID. We'll have a replay for you after this as well through the Basketball Saskatchewan YouTube channel and the Golden Ticket Sports YouTube channel. Coach Jess has really got a cool presentation for us today, and I think relevant. Hopefully, not much longer for the in COVID component, but we'll let her take it away here.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanner, and thanks to Basketball SAS for having me present here for the speaker series. I thought this topic was relevant. Skill development obviously is near and dear to my heart because it's how I started out coaching. So hopefully those of you watching or watching the playback of this find this useful. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I think Tanner's managing the chat. And also happy to take questions after as well. A little bit of background about myself. So as Tanner mentioned, I am the current head coach for the University of Waterloo Warriors women's basketball team. Prior to that, I was also an assistant for the Ryerson Rams from 2016 to 2020. I've also served as a provincial head coach and assistant coach for U14 and 17 Canada Summer Games. Also had a brief stint with the Sacramento Kings and their summer league team. And then prior to that, I had a playing experience, Division I level, and earned a bachelor's and a master's of exercise science. I say all that not to boast, but just so you can kind of understand where my background is, how I use my background in not just basketball, but exercise science to help kind of develop a player's skill set. But predominantly today, I'm going to be talking about how I do the planning. So there's obviously other components to skill development being just one minor part to overall player development. Today, I'm just focusing on the skill and basketball portion, but know that I will touch on the physical, social, and mental aspects as well that go into developing an athlete. So bear that in mind. So whenever I'm putting together a plan, I always start with two things. The first being goals, and then the second being with the end in mind. So looking at the finished product, what does the athlete look like? What do they need? What do I want them to learn? And then how am I going to get them to execute what they've just learned? So what the loads look like. And then loads to me are like a progressive levels that are needed to obtain a skill. And the loads can be skipped, which I'll explain further in the presentation. But it's always a good idea to start at the base level, regardless of your skill, if you're performing the drill the first time. So I'll give you an example. This was an athlete that I worked with a couple summers ago, high school level athlete. And I know there's varying coaches for varying, like I'll say, levels of athletes. But I think ultimately the level of athlete doesn't matter. This is a framework for whether you're at the youth level, high school, or even university sports. So this particular athlete is a guard. He wanted to get better with his ball handling under pressure. He wanted to be a better decision maker in close spaces and just wanted to be able to be more physical to prep for the university game. I always ask about pro likeness. Like I'll ask the athletes, like who do you model your game after? Who do you admire that plays professionally? And I do that for two reasons. One, because I know I'm going to look to the film and have a chance to show the athlete what it is that I want them to do. But the other thing is just buy-in. I find athletes tend to be more engaged and interested when it's people or relevant people that they admire. So that being said, I think there are a couple key things when it comes to good goal making. And so when I talk about pro likeness, I'm kind of skipping ahead, but co-creation is so huge for creating buy-in. So these goals here, these are the goals that the athlete actually came forward with. And then we had a discussion about how realistic they are. So when I say like stretching your beliefs, a good goal needs to stretch your belief in terms of where your game could be, not where your game is now, but where your game could be. And this one is always, tricky to really hone down, because it's not an exact science. Like, we can look at numbers and statistics, but it's more of an art and a fine line between where the athlete is now and then where they could be. But yeah, the co-creation piece is huge, and having, the pro likeness and showing film of somebody that they believe in can help create further buy-in. And then the last piece, and I stole all of these keys from a good friend of mine, Fez Ahmed. But the last piece here is that you need to evoke an emotion to act now. And so in part of that co-creation is creating or allowing the athlete to kind of guide their own training. They're going to be a lot more motivated to act now and get after the training if they know it's with their own goals in mind. And so that's why that component is really, really crucial to creating buy-in and having a good training session. So after I've established goals, it kind of gets me thinking about, okay, what are my objectives for the training session? So for this particular athlete in a training session, I was thinking about how can I load in first and second line reads? And then can I put him in game scenarios from his team actions? So what I did from here, I actually got a couple game film from his club team that he plays on. And I tried to identify some of the key actions that he is in games. And we highlighted dribble handoffs. So you'll see that in the film that I'm going to show, and then how I planned it out from there. So this first clip of films, or first film of clips, is not my athlete. So this is like when I pull the clips of Kyrie, and the main goal for this is just to have the athlete be able to watch the behavior or actions that we want to teach. So I'll usually send it ahead of time, and then when we meet, we'll discuss things like triggers and cues. Triggers and cues to me are like things that the defense is doing that elicits an offensive response. So I might ask things like, what do you see? What's the defense doing? What is the offense doing to counter that? Or what do you think the offensive player is feeling in this moment to, that elicits his response? And the biggest thing is that I'm trying to build the athlete's imagination through watching film. Because when we get on court, we don't have, 9 other players on the floor to mimic this. And so I'm trying to start to build their imagination so that we're seeing the same things and feeling the same things when we're both on the floor together. So here's a look at some of Kyrie Irving's dribble handoff options. I think there's 6 options here that I chose to show. I try to keep film sessions really, really short. So no more than 10 clips, I'll say, but it's usually around 5. So there's 6 options here that I'll show. First one being just a simple dribble handoff, defender goes over, the pick defender drop. So Irving goes for a floater here. I took these just from a YouTube edit. So it's really nice that it has the slow-mo and even the cues or the triggers of what the defender is doing on top. So we'll see another one here. Defender goes under. There's an option to shoot. Defender goes under. There's also an option for a rescreen. We might also talk about like different finishes or how, oops. We might also talk about different finishes or how the offensive player is setting things up. So you'll see in the next clip here. So this defender tries to blow up the screen. Kyrie takes him one step higher. And now he's got a backdoor cut. Oh, okay, that one ended early. That was just the last clip. So he turns around and shoots a jumper because the defense overplays. So after we watch that clip, I start to go into my planning phase. So if anyone's taken Train to Compete with NCCP, I'm sure you're familiar with this ABCD model of phases of teaching. I've actually taken this and have adopted my own ABCD model, just a bit more easier for me to remember and a bit more tangible. So phase A being on air. So any drills that you're trying to just max out reps and get the athlete into some blocked learning. On air is arguably a great place to start. I always say if you have resources or you're not in a pandemic and don't have to socially distance, use the resources you have. So if you have bodies around, you have a parent around, the best way to learn cues is actually to see physical bodies. Now, if you only have trash cans, then by all means use a trash can. But phase A that's what that usually consists of. Phase B is more of a breakdown of the reads and reactions. So again, similar to on air, but with bodies. Phase C is a more controlled environment. And sorry, before I jump to phase C, phase B might still have guided reactions. So the defense will like cut you off or show left or right in order to give the offensive player something to read and react to. And then phase C is more controlled compete. So one-on-one scenarios or 1v2 scenarios, which leads into our last phase, which is live D. So randomized options that the athlete has to decide when and what to use. So the way that pans out for me, and like I said, I tend to work backwards. So I start with the end in mind. I always end my training sessions with debriefs because that will tell me what went well, what the athlete learned, and what could be better. It also gives me time to reflect for the next session in how I can improve, how I can take some of the feedback that I was given to maybe even modify some of the drills. But having the end in mind, I know I want to get to like at least a 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 live dribble handoff start scenario, because that's been the key identifying action that I want to work on with this athlete so that he can get better in tight spaces. Prior to that, there'll need to be some type of load where the athlete's not having to necessarily think about a secondary offensive player. They might be thinking about a secondary defensive player. That's why I have 1v1 versus 1v2 controlled compete scenarios. A load below that. So these are your phase B. So 1v guides. So you have a coach kind of showing one way or the other. Then you have one-on-one, so just on-air reps. And then prior to that is movement prep. So further dissection of what's to come. And then always, and I know this is probably less common, and hopefully becoming more common now, but is the mental prep. And so I call these mindful moments with my athletes. And that can be anything from centered breathing to setting an intention for the practice. Like, hey coach, I just want you to foul the heck out of me. I want to, work on really focus on my physicality today. But I like to even use the film session as a way to mentally prepare, because it lets them know what it is we want them to do. But sometimes even outlining the workout, so even sharing this plan with the athlete, is enough of a mental prep so they can start to visualize what the workout is going to entail. So here's a clip of some of the components that I talked about. So you see here, this is the movement prep. They're just working on external perturbation, so handling the ball under pressure. They're trying to compete right now for the number of crossovers they can do in 20 seconds while their partner fouls the heck out of them. Then we go to finishes. So these are just finishes with contact. Again, just warming up the body, making sure our balance is getting activated as well. So really, really simple on-air reads. Arguably, you could do this even with a chair if you don't have access, if you just want to watch and don't have extra hands on you. You can also get the athletes to do it with themselves. Here we're just repping out like a pull-up read, so the defender is chasing them in this imaginary scenario. We'll usually compete this once we get comfortable with the actual skill. So it might be, first to 3 or first to 2 in a row. Or we might even compete as groups if we have enough athletes at the session. So again, further to the guided reads, this is still blocked learning. So we're still showing with guides the action that we want them to do. Sorry, I'm not able to control. So we're still showing guided reads, but this can easily be built to read and reaction. So if you see that's actually Fez there in the red, but he's giving guided second reads. So the second line defender. And right now he's showing more middle than he is strong side. So that's allowing the offensive player to kind of Euro step to finish. But there might be times when we do go into reads where he's mixing up his position. So times when he's standing on the block. And so the offensive player can finish, in this case, on the left side of the rim or front rim, or other times when, like you saw in the first NBA clip where the defender is dropping back and then the offensive player can finish with a floater. So I like to actually show what the defensive responses are to that, so we can highlight it here in this controlled environment. Then we get to controlled competes after this. So then we get to controlled competes, where this is from a pin down scenario, but you could easily do this from a handoff. Where one offensive player goes for, sorry guys, Sorry. So you can just see here like how this correlates to the film we watched previously, and it's starting to like click a little here. But for these controlled competes, we'll have one offensive player go against each, like a new defender every time, and it's a game to 2. So offense only has to score 2, or the defense has to get 3 stops. And so you can play with those numbers. You can also go make it, take it. So if you score with the right read, you keep possession. And then last but not least, live. So we go 2-on-2 here. So the athletes are working in pairs. You have a coach that sets either a pin down, or we do this from a handoff as well. And then obviously you can load it to 3-on-3 live as well with a dribble handoff start. Any questions so far? Tanner, are we good?
Yeah, we're good. I'll jump in here just because I think it's relevant to where we're going just in the COVID thing now. With the sometimes, I guess, inability to have that live defense, how have you also kept skill development interesting? Is there other ways in which you've loaded things in where maybe you can't use bodies, but up the level of complexity or interest for your athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have film on that as well that I'll share with you in a bit. So if you want to hang on to that question, I will definitely get to it in a bit.
Perfect.
So yeah, after a session like this, some measurable things that I'm thinking for the next time is a good way to like test and see if the athletes kind of grasp. Like I'm sure you noticed through the clips, like this didn't happen in one day, it happened over time. But after that session, at the beginning of next session, I might start with like the one-on-ones or the 1v2. I would probably not start with the 3v3, but just to kind of get a gauge for like what reactions and reads that they might be struggling with, or which ones have clicked and made sense. Other ways to kind of build is to just add more reads. So we didn't get through all 6 of the options that I showed in the NBA clips. So I might just like tag on another read. So that's kind of building their basketball skill component. You can add more players. I probably wouldn't get much larger than 3v3, and it's also dependent on who you have available. But there's also the social component too once you start introducing more players. And then you can add score and time scenarios, and that's going to kind of tax the athletes, mental component, and just further add to making it more game-like. So what does this all look like? And it kind of leads into your question here, Tanner. What does this look like when we're not able to have contact, we're not able to share equipment, and we're limited to have 10 people in a gym, including the coach. So this is actually an example of my team now and how we've handled the pandemic training, if you will. And so very similar to the last athlete, wants to be a better ball handler under pressure, decision-making off ball screens, and then finisher at the rim. Just to save on some time, I won't show you the film, but typically I'm drawing film from either a previous game or someone else in our league or a different year of that athlete, because I have access to it. But whatever you have access to, whether it's just finding stuff on YouTube or even just filming for yourself, I recommend using that. But again, I'm thinking my thinking in terms of objectives is a little different because I'm not able to create that same game-like environment. And so my objectives become more around building movement skills, so mimicking the movements they might use in a game, and then building up that athlete's imagination. And this becomes even more crucial, I would argue, because we're not able to use guides and live defenders. So my planning, again, we start from backwards and then work our way to the beginning. So after the debrief, we're probably only getting through phase A, really. There was a time when we were in a different color code and we could get to phase B with a breakdown and guided defenders. But a way to kind of get around that is, instead of using, I don't call it read and reaction anymore, it's just reactions. And so we'll use numbered reactions or directional reactions, and those are audible calls. So I might tag a read to the number 1, and another read to the number 2, and another read to the number 3. And so at the point of decision, I'll make a call, 1, 2, or 3, and then the athlete will have to execute a reaction to, or react to that number. Not the most game-like, but I do find it gives the athlete some sense of randomization. But again, super, super important to continue to build their imagination so that we're on the same page in terms of what we're understanding. Lots of on-air finishing just to build the muscle memory and movements. For this particular workout, I'd have some type of ball handling movement breakdown. And again, movement prep, mental prep before the training session. So I actually stole this from Elise. She works with Canada Basketball with the women's high performance. If I could find this play button. So this is just some of the stuff that she does with her athletes. This is pretty general, but I like how it gets the body warmed up. And you could literally use this for any session, whether you're working on finishes or even just shooting. There's other coaches that I follow. So pocket dribbles I identified for this particular workout would be really important. So again, when I was talking about directional reads, in this, you can't hear the audio, but in this particular drill, the partners are yelling out left or right. So they finish with their left hand or their right hand. So it's usually after they receive the handoff. So it's like here, they might say left. And then that gives the athlete time to react. The next clip here is just some ball screen actions like we were talking about. And sometimes like giving the reactions is hard to get the first time. So you see like this athlete here kind of messes up, but I always try to delay the audible to make it tougher for the athlete. Sorry, I'm waiting for this cursor to show up. So here I might say 1, and then that gives her the cue to react there. Same thing again. In this example for ball screens, it's always after they clear the screen that I'm giving the audible. I also like to film, so I didn't actually film this or my athletes for the purpose of this presentation. I actually filmed this for the athletes to watch back, so that when we review the film and we're talking about cues and triggers and then things that the offensive player is doing to make it game-like, We talk about eyes a lot. So you see this player here, she's kind of looking off. Whereas this player, she doesn't look at all. So we're not really sure what scenario she's building in her mind. So again, numbered cues as soon as they leave or as soon as they clear the screen, and then we'll watch this film back so that we can have a discussion around what it looked like and then what it felt like, if they felt like it was game speed or game-like in feel as well. And then different measurables, obviously, like I said, with the last example, is the next session, start with a reaction drill. So whether it's the left-right finishes, let's see if they remember that from the first session. And then you can, again, add more loads, add more options, and then even create time and score scenarios to just add a little bit more pressure. Last couple slides here. Obviously you saw, like, I use social media to kind of draw from my own inspiration and influence. But even for the athletes, right? Like, I've shared with a couple of like skill trainers and strength coaches that I follow on social here. But it's a great way to kind of reach your athletes. And I'm a firm believer of like reaching your athletes at where they are. They're always on their phone, and guarantee if you send them a quick like TikTok video that's like 10 seconds long, they're more, I'll say, willing to watch that than probably an edit that you put together and have to physically sit down with them and watch. So I find social media to be a really good tool to have to, again, continue to build that imagination of your athletes. So in summary, start with the goals and start with the end in mind. Make sure you're teaching through your ABCs and go through all steps when you're starting out before you decide to skip on those steps. Obviously, being in COVID, you're only going to get through the first one, maybe two phases. And then I think I've probably killed this throughout this presentation, but build the athlete's imagination. You can't assume that they know what you know. So being on the same page is critical. And then COVID or not, I think you always have to adapt to your environment, adapt to what resources you have in the gym at that given day and that given time, and then try to learn from experience or learn from others, and hopefully learn from this presentation. Any questions, comments, feedback?
Awesome, Coach. I'll kick things off here while people are starting to type in questions. So one of the ones I have for you off the hop here, as you transition from assistant coach to head coach, how have you, I guess, put skill development into your program? Is that just outside of team practice? Is it built into team practice as well? Maybe give us a bit of your philosophy on that.
Yeah, I believe in both. I believe you need to carve time into a practice. I actually like the breakdown when we're going into more like small-sided components of our offense. I find the transition is smoother and the athletes retain more. But then I do think you need to set time aside separate. So we called them vitamins when I was at Ryerson, but we just call them individuals here at Waterloo now. So we actually have dedicated time for the athletes to work on what their goals are, because we'll do like IPPs with them, and we'll call it it's IPP day. So it's the individuals, but it's IPP day. So you get to pick what you want to work on based on what your IPP is. So you don't always get to do that in a team setting, I'll say. I think having that time, especially in the off season, especially now when it's all that we can work on, is really important.
Sure. I think one of the things then to tag onto that with the IPPs, how much of that is coach led, how much of that is player led, and then the follow up, is that measured throughout the course of the season? Is it adapted based on how things are going for that each athlete and relative to where they're at?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, it's a co-creation, right? It's way less valuable if I'm just telling the player like this is what you need to work on. But again, that's where it becomes a conversation. Now, if you know my 5'2" point guard is saying, I want to take jump, like when we talk about stretching their goals, that's probably a great stretch and doesn't really serve our team. Um, so that's where I come in, but in large part they are very much player led. But I think it's context too, right? Like the athlete needs to understand what their role is on the team, and so that's where my input comes in helping the athlete understand that. But it's in large part player led. And then how that changes during the season, we'll meet formally at least 3 times a year to discuss IPPs. So those change at least 3 times a year, but informally, we're meeting way more than that. And so I would say this probably happens more in season, when you're identifying what's less of what needs to be worked on and more of what's going well. Like, hey, your jump shot off the bounce is really killer right now. How can we expand that to like exploit it against teams? So that's kind of an example of how an IPP can build out. So yeah.
That's actually tags into my next question here. Like, I've read about coaches here expanding not just on players' weaknesses here, but really strengthening their strengths. And maybe you have a percentage of time in which you spend on weaknesses versus strengths, or is there anything, I guess, in your belief that we should be really expanding that strength basis here versus working on the weaknesses? Is it a balance?
Um, I would say it depends on the time of the year as opposed to percentages in a workout. If we're out of season, I want to teach you and build new skills. So like right now, this year has been all about building new skills because we have the time for it. Whereas in season, um, especially the closer you get to playoffs, it's more about like keeping the players' confidence really high. So a lot of times athletes that I've worked out, they have a routine. Like they do mic-ins, they do finishes, and then they have their shooting routine. And then there's little like one-on-one games with read and reacts that you saw that will still play within their workout, but it's about keeping their confidence high. And so we're not really adding anything to their game there. We're just working on the things that they're best at and the things that they'll get in a game. So the percentages aren't different. The one thing I will say that maybe wasn't included in the film is shooting is always part of my workouts. You wouldn't have seen it in the clips, obviously, because it's not where this focus was, but I usually save shooting to the end. So we might like finish that 3-on-3 game and then we'll do like transition threes or whatever it is that the athletes have identified as either their anchors or things that they need to improve. So we'll always have some type of shooting in the workout as well. Whether it's a strength or not, I just think we need better shooters.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Kate, from the attendees here, is figuring out how to load drills trial and error at first, or do you usually base it around a basic skill and go from there?
Yeah, to be honest, so this group that I train, I call my guinea pig group. So I do a lot of trial and error with them before I like take these drills to my own team. But I think when you're doing your planning, that's where a lot of this comes. So like basketball immersion, I'll say if you have access to, is another great resource in terms of like finding different drills. But like I said, that's why I kind of work backwards, because I'm trying to think of like what it is that I want to see, and then what's like a further breakdown of that drill. So there have been times when I'll think a load is appropriate for the skill level, and then we'll do it, and it's like doesn't look good at all. It's the athletes are confused, they don't understand, and then that's when I, in the debrief, ask like what's going well, or maybe that's my own reflection after the debrief, like this didn't go well. I didn't set the athletes up so to adequately learn. And so what's a step down from this that I can tailor to for next time so that they can grasp it a little bit easier. But like I said before, that's why I always start, like go, especially if it's the first time you're going through a drill, go through phase A, on air, B, like go through the steps, even if you're like, there's a pro in that one of the clips that's training with like high school guys, and like even pros need rudimentary level, right? So don't skip those steps if you don't have to. If it's like the second or third time you've done that drill, then yeah, you can kind of skip loads, if you will.
Awesome, Coach. We are just about at 45 minutes here. Really appreciate you putting things together for us today and taking the time. I said we'll have your replay up early next week on Monday's the plan, but we'll give you the final word here as we finish off.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Tanner, and Basketball Sask for having me on board. And I'll leave my contact information here for anyone that has follow-up questions or just wants to reach out and chat basketball. Always happy to do that, especially during these times. So thanks again, and hopefully we can all do this in person again soon.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome, Coach. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
No problem. Take care.